this is where it all began, right?
This is where it all began. April 23rd, 2018. I received the call that a body was located off of Highway 98. I come over to this area, and approximately here was about where the head of the body was at, and stretched out across the ditch with the feet facing in that direction. She had bruises from head to toe, covering her entire body. She had lacerations on her face, stomach, legs.
So this woman suffered before she died?
She suffered. I've never seen anything like it. It was extreme violence. Extreme violence, overkill.
And who would do something like that?
At the time, you don't know. And what you worry about then is, are they loose in our community? What type of individual am I dealing with? Or individuals? Is there one person? Is there two? You have a million questions that you can ask, but you have no answers at the time. The next day, they identified the woman as Aileen Seiden, a young 31-year-old female in the Miami area.
I've known Aileen Seiden for 25 years. She was my best friend. Aileen had called me. She had told me it was pretty where she was. The last talk I had with Aileen was very different. She told me just these horrific things you never think you'll hear from your best friend. She said, I need your help.
It was like a movie. My sister's involved, and I don't know what's happening. I told her to run.
You used the word run? Did you say run?
100%. I said, run, get out of there. Go. She's like, I can't.
She was scared to death.
This doesn't happen. This doesn't happen to us. This doesn't happen in real life.
We received a call from the Sportsman's Lodge motel. There was a room that they were in the process of cleaning. There was blood.
And what goes through your mind as you walk through all this beauty?
This right here would be the last place that you could ever imagine a homicide taking place, especially right here in this piece of paradise. I'll take you to room number 15.
Now, when the housekeepers first came through this door, what did they see?
They said the furniture was knocked over onto the floor. As they started cleaning the room, they found more and more stuff to be wrong. They noticed stuff missing from the beds, the sheets, anything like that. This bed here was completely covered in blood stain.
So that tells you there was a violent scene going on.
Yes.
And what happened in room 15?
It's unknown.
If these walls could talk, right?
Oh, if they could talk, I'd like to hear them.
Apalachicola, Florida is a wonderful small place.
For Franklin County Assistant Prosecutor Jared Patterson, the sleepy Gulf Coast town of Apalachicola and surrounding countryside are among the last remnants of a bygone era.
It certainly still harkens back to a time before there was condos on every inch of the beach and before there were high-rises. We're referred to here, the counties along this area of the coast, as the Forgotten Coast.
But when a couple heading to a nearby fishing pond discovered Aileen Seiden's battered body on April 23, 2018, Patterson wondered what had brought a killer to Florida's Forgotten Coast.
The horror that it really was. It absolutely shocked people.
It looked like someone was in a hurry. Whoever it was dumped the body and took off.
Lead investigator Lieutenant Ronnie Jones, then with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, says documenting Eileen's unsettling dump site was the first of two ominous events over the next 24 hours. He was soon dispatched to the second crime scene at the Sportsman's Lodge Motel. And that bloody spectacle inside room 15.
So what's it like for you to be back in here?
Brings back some pretty bad memories.
Jones' memories live in stark contrast to the tree-shaded grounds of the otherwise peaceful motel.
As soon as I came in, I noticed the bed. I mean, you couldn't miss it. I mean, this whole area was covered and had blood stains on it.
And when you saw that kind of blood loss, what did that tell you?
I just put two and two together, and I automatically put that back to the body that was found the day before.
You did that quickly, like that?
Had to have. It wasn't just somebody cut themselves and bled a little bit on the bed. I mean, the amount of blood that was on this bed tells me that whoever was here was probably deceased.
Jones recalled there was a smell of vinegar in the room.
And what did that tell you?
That someone attempted to clean the crime scene.
A luminol test for traces of human blood revealed what an apparently hasty cleanup couldn't hide.
The whole entire bathroom lit up.
So that was the scene of perhaps some of her most vicious attacks was inside that bathroom?
Yes.
And Jones says the shower curtain rod was a possible weapon.
On the rod was located a palm print and also blood.
And that's significant evidence, right?
That's right.
Testing would soon confirm that it was Eileen's blood in the motel room. Now came the gut-wrenching duty to notify Eileen's sister, Francesca Seiden.
He said my sister was murdered. I don't know, like, what do you do? You look for support. That's all I could do. I didn't understand why, like, it was given to me, again, like, to handle another loss.
While growing up in Miami, then 16-year-old Francesca and 9-year-old Eileen faced their first tragedy when their beloved mother, Mirtha, passed away from cancer.
How did the two of you deal with this?
We didn't talk about it because it was so fast.
6 years later, their father, Frank, a successful furniture manufacturer who Francesca says shared a special bond with Eileen, suddenly died from a heart attack. It left Eileen, then 14, an orphan, and 22-year-old Francesca with a decision to make.
I signed the papers and I became her legal guardian.
And what did that mean? What were your responsibilities?
I became a parent. I had to take her to school. I had to pick her up from school. I had to finish my own school. I was working. I didn't have time to grieve. And I don't think that she did either.
7 years later, Francesca moved to Los Angeles on her own. That's when she says Eileen, now in her 20s, began grieving their parents.
She started to think a lot. She became more sensitive.
Something like losing your parents has long-lasting effects throughout your life. It's obvious that it did.
This is Eileen's best friend. Not wanting her name associated with this case, she has asked 48 Hours to refer to her as Allie. She remembers a strong and determined Eileen making it on her own in Miami.
She worked as a property manager. She lived in a great apartment. You know, she paid her own rent. She made her bills. She was very independent.
Francesca saw that independence firsthand when Eileen made an extended visit to LA in 2016.
Looking back, do you wish she had stayed with you?
100%. Because whatever happened when she went back to Miami is when she reconnected with Zach.
Zach was Zachary Abell, who Eileen had known since they were teenagers.
I'm not sure if I had the best reputation in high school. At first, she wasn't really sure about him.
But years later, she and Zach Abell started dating.
I think in the beginning, Eileen found Zach fun, but I think it changed pretty quickly.
Investigators in Franklin County would soon learn all about Zach Abell. They discovered that Zach, Aileen, and this woman, Christina Araujo, had all been seen in the Apalachicola area. Detectives also learned the three shared a room at the Sportsman's Lodge, room number 15.
We needed to know what happened inside that hotel room. Outside of 3 people entered and 2 came out carrying a body.
Off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Captain Mike Pickavet set sail on his 50-foot boat.
It's kind of weird trying to remember any good times. There just weren't. There was always some issue.
Back in 2018, Mike would play a central role in Aileen Seiden's murder investigation. He knew Aileen and her boyfriend, Zach Abell, well.
Zach is just very entertaining. He's very extroverted.
Mike had met Zach by chance at a bar about 7 years earlier.
He came up to me at Duffy's and said, "Hey, I like your shirt." And I'm like, "Okay."
Then Christina came up.
Christina Araujo, Zach's girlfriend at the time. The two had been dating for about 4 years. Mike says Christina immediately started boasting about her powerful father.
Right out of the gate, she said, "Oh yeah, my dad's a major with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, and if we ever get into any trouble with the law, he can take care of it." I was like, "What? Who says that?"
Despite their odd first meeting, Mike says he began hanging out with the couple. What followed were years of wild nights, wild parties, and lots of heavy drinking.
That was their go-to thing. Okay, we've got to do shots of this, shots of this.
But Mike says there was an interesting power dynamic in the couple's relationship, with Christina, who is 8 years older than Zach, calling the shots.
She was very controlling and very directing. He would follow her lead with stuff.
One day in 2016, Zach stopped by Mike's boat, but not with Christina. Instead, Zach introduced Mike to Aileen Seiden. Mike could tell Zach now had 2 women in his life.
It was the weirdest thing. If your relationship's not working, just end it and move on.
However, Mike says that Zach couldn't make a clean break from Christina, who was also his business partner.
He tried so many times, he just didn't know how to. And then also all the threats all the time that she could make him disappear. Every time she got drunk, she'd say some weird things.
Aileen's best friend, Allie, says Zach and Aileen began to secretly date.
She seemed to love him so much that she was still hoping that he would, decide to be with her. He would lead her on to think he was trying to end it with Christina.
In 2017, Aileen unexpectedly lost her job as a property manager.
She was really starting to lose control of her own life.
Allie says that may explain why Aileen eventually started working at Zach and Christina's used car dealership.
It wasn't the independent life that she had always lived.
Allie says Aileen continued to pressure Zach to break up with Christina for good. But when Zach finally tried to end things with Christina, she countered with an unconventional proposal.
It was not the answer that anyone expected. Christina came back and said, "Well, why don't we try and all be in a relationship then?" It now became this opportunity for this throuple, 3-way kind of relationship.
A throuple is a romantic relationship among 3 people. Allie says Aileen was against the idea.
And Aileen said, "Absolutely not. There's no way. It's never going to work." And there was kind of a crickets for a few weeks.
But Allie says Aileen later changed her mind. The trio was now a throuple.
I was in shock, really, but also a little bit happy for them that maybe this could work.
But it didn't work. Before long, there was trouble.
This whole dynamic started to change where one of them always seemed to be the odd man out or was jealous. At that point, it just started to spiral out of control.
According to Mike Pickavet, things escalated, leading to irrational behavior and fights fueled by alcohol. He says Aileen and Christina traded punches often, usually resulting in black eyes on one or both of the women, that they'd sometimes hide behind big sunglasses.
It was an everyday thing, every second day thing, I could say.
Allie remembers things differently. She says Zach was the main aggressor in the relationship.
Aileen would call me and say, you have to come over here, like he hurt me again. And I'd rush over there and photograph her and beg her to go to the police.
But Allie says Aileen refused, fearing Christina's law enforcement connections would work against her. Aileen's sister Francesca was furious when she learned of the abuse.
I wanted my sister out of this situation. I wanted her out.
It's hard to leave.
It's hard to leave, and I had this feeling that Christina was more violent of the two.
It was really difficult to see her going through a time like this. It was just so hard, and she was scared to death.
Once, Allie says the abuse got so bad, she took Aileen to the emergency room.
They took her to the hospital because they have to report things, but she wouldn't say where the bruises came from.
Aileen's best friend had to deliver a hard truth.
Aileen, you have to break up with this guy. Someone's gonna end up dead. When Aileen was in real trouble, it was hard to get anyone to come rescue her.
The path that led to Aileen Seiden's murder may have begun weeks earlier. In 2018, Allie was surprised that despite the physical violence in their relationship, Aileen had decided to move in with Zach Abell and Christina Araujo. The throuple was now working together, sleeping together, and living together.
Aileen was trapped in the relationship because she was trapped financially, but she felt that that was one last chance to make it work. It was like a 1 month or 2 month trial.
But within a few weeks, Allie says Aileen had had enough.
Aileen was just going to move out. She was really done with the relationship.
But Aileen's plans to leave were halted on April 7th, 2018, after Zach and Christina had gotten into a violent fight. Allie says she got a call from Aileen on Zach's phone.
She was going to leave and get Zach out of the house, but like to go to a coffee shop. The next call I got was from Christina. She was angry and furious.
Allie says Christina threatened to report the car Aileen and Zach were driving in as stolen in an apparent attempt to keep them from leaving her behind. Allie immediately warned Aileen and Zach.
Instead of coming around and coming back like I thought they would, they hit the gas and went to Georgia. I said, what are you doing, Aileen? You don't have your phone. You don't have a wallet. This is crazy. She said, we're going on a road trip. This is a good thing.
But the road trip wasn't a good thing to Christina Araujo. She began harassing Zach and Aileen, sending a storm of angry texts. You two deserve each other. Christina sent more than 150 texts in roughly 24 hours. All went unanswered, including this one. My dad will be calling you. Later, Christina issued this threat. You effed me over, and now I'm effing you over.
I was just trying to tell her, Christina, why don't you worry about your own life?
About 48 hours into the road trip, Zach and Aileen were heading to Texas, and Christina seemed to have a change of heart, texting, if you want to come back home, come back. You never have to question my love. For reasons that are unknown, instead of coming home, Zach invited Christina to join them, and she flew to Dallas. But with the throuple united, the old problems returned.
Aileen started to call me from Zach's phone at night saying, this is getting bad. And I don't know what to do. It wasn't until Christina arrived that started to happen. I was really worried someone would get hurt.
By day 10 of the road trip, Aileen's older sister, Francesca, was also worried. She hadn't heard from Aileen in a while. When the trio stopped in New Orleans, Aileen finally called Francesca and shared an alarming suspicion.
She's like, I think they're gonna kill me. No joke. So I was like, Aileen, run to the nearest gas station, go tell the person.
Call 911.
Yeah, run to I said, run, get out of there, go. She's like, I can't.
Francesca, desperate to help, tried to get more details from Aileen.
If I had where the address was, I would have called the police then and there. But she had to go. She had to get off, and she hung up. I was extremely frustrated, but I was scared.
With no way to help her sister, Francesca hoped Aileen would stay safe. The road trip continued into its second week. The trio then headed to Panama City, Florida, but a missed exit led them to the forgotten coast.
The road trip is difficult to understand. Partying one day and murdering the next.
David Adlerstein is a reporter for the Apalachicola Times, one of the oldest newspapers in Florida.
I've been covering the Aileen Seiden case since the week it happened.
On the evening of April 21st, the trio, seen here in this screenshot from surveillance footage, stumbled into the quiet peace of Franklin County.
They went to a popular restaurant, the Red Pirate, played miniature golf, partied.
At the recommendation of a local, the throuple headed to the nearby Sportsman's Lodge motel. They reserved the last vacancy of the night, room 15. The next morning, on April 22nd, 2018, the throuple made a plan.
They decided they'd spend another day there, not get back on the road, and make it a party. So they got up in the morning and went to the liquor store.
Here they are in these screenshots from the store's surveillance footage. While there, the trio purchased large bottles of vodka and Fireball whiskey.
When I went to investigate their path that day and went to the liquor store, the clerk, she pointed out that the Fireball that they bought was the largest bottle you could buy. And this is just the three of them.
The throuple then returned to the Sportsman's Lodge motel.
I don't think Aileen was having fun. I think she was just trying to maybe get by and stay alive.
Allie says she spoke to Aileen that day.
Aileen said, I need to leave him. I'm telling you, I'm like a sex slave. He has this really scary look in his eye. It's very scary. It's different. And she said, I need your help.
Allie says the two friends had crafted an escape plan. Aileen would get on a bus from Tampa, the trio's next destination.
I bought her a Greyhound ticket because she didn't have a wallet.
The bus would drop Aileen off near Miami, and Allie would take her home. Aileen just needed to get on that bus, and she'd be safe.
And then, I never heard back. I never heard anything after that.
The next night, hundreds of miles away in Fort Lauderdale, Mike Picavet was home and alone. There was a knock at the door. It was Christina Araujo and Zach Abell.
I was like, okay, where's Aileen? And right away, Christina says, oh, she ran away. And I said, bull. I said, where is she? And Zach right away, it started to choke up, and he said, she's dead.
The news was shocking enough, but Mike says once Christina was out of earshot, Zach told him what happened.
He said Christina killed her. He woke up, she was dead next to him, and he tried to give her CPR. Then wanted to call 911. Christina said no and told me you can't call 911. For some reason, he kept on saying he had to protect Christina. I'm like, what do you got to protect her for?
Mike says he wanted to protect both of his friends. He feared a violent outcome if he called 911.
I didn't want them to get killed. Just wanted to make sure that they were brought in a safe way. And the only thing that I could think about is to go talk to her father.
Christina's father, Colonel Tony Araujo, the one Mike says Christina had always bragged could make her problems go away. When Zach and Christina fell asleep, Mike took this photo and says he went online to search for Christina's father, a man he had never met.
So I was panicking, trying to find his phone number.
When Mike finally got a hold of Colonel Araujo, he didn't immediately reveal the deadly news.
I said, I got to talk to you. It's about Christina. It's very important.
Mike says Christina's father directed Mike to meet him at an odd place, a gas station.
So I went up there, I said, Christina killed somebody. And he says, you know I'm a cop, right? I'm like, yes, sir, I do. He right away said, wait right there.
Mike says Christina's father then brought him to the sheriff's office to make a formal statement.
He did what was the right thing to do. He got two other people to ask me all the questions.
Later that day, Mike was shown a photo, and he was the one to identify the battered body of Aileen Seiden. With that confirmation, police descended on Mike's home as Zach and Christina were about to leave. They were arrested and brought back to Franklin County. The pair were later charged with first-degree murder. It would take almost 6 years before Zach Abell and Christina Araujo would face a jury, and by then, only one of them would stand trial.
You're healing, you're doing the things that you need to heal, and then you're stopped.
For almost 6 years, Francesca Seiden lived in agonizing limbo as her sister Eileen's case, complicated by having two defendants, face delay after frustrating delay.
And now you're gonna get ready for this big moment, and it stops again.
Finally, in January of 2024, at the Franklin County Courthouse in Apalachicola, Florida, Zach Abell was about to face trial. He had pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder and would stand before the jury alone. 8 months earlier, Christina Araujo took a plea deal for a lesser charge of second-degree murder. So she admitted taking part in this.
Yes, she implicated herself in the actual beating of Aileen.
After studying the mountain of evidence, prosecutor Jared Patterson believes Zach Abell was more responsible in Eileen's murder, and the state is relying on the jury believing Christina Araujo's version of what happened inside room 15.
The only one who has told us anything about what happened in that room is Christina Araujo.
Once Christina made her plea deal, she would become the prosecution's star witness.
Print reporter David Adlerstein, camera in hand, was there as Christina Araujo transported the courtroom back to the evening of April 22nd, 2018. Araujo testified that she, Zach Abell, and Aileen were relaxing in the room at the Sportsman's Lodge after a day of heavy drinking.
When Zach drinks, does he act differently?
Yes. It becomes very aggressive, very mean.
Zach Abell became violently enraged, says Araujo, when Aileen posed a seemingly innocent question.
She said, Christina, guess what?
And she looks over at Christina and says, hey, Christina, guess what? How would that sentence be finished?
I have no idea because she never got to finish it.
Zachary got up immediately and went over to her and was in her face, hitting her. He's just yelling at her, telling her, you always start problems.
Araujo admits to also hitting Aileen as she demanded to know what she was about to say. She never got an answer.
And I got so frustrated, I left the room.
After stepping outside room 15 for a few minutes, Araujo claims she returned to find Abell and Aileen in the bathroom.
When I opened the door, he had something white in his hand, like if he was poking at her.
The medical examiner was able to identify small circular bruising to the body of Aileen that could be consistent with a shower curtain rod.
Like the shower curtain rod investigators recovered that had palm print impressions in Eileen's blood.
Whose palm was it?
The palm print belonged to Zachary Abell.
The assault continued near the bed, says Araujo, where she says Abell reached for his wooden walking stick.
He hits her several times with it. When he hit her in the back, though, the stick broke.
We had actually found pieces of that wooden staff in the hotel room. We didn't realize the significance of it until we found the other piece in the vehicle that contained our victim's DNA.
Araujo says she watched in terror as Abel began using that stick to sexually assault Aileen.
Christina's description of the crime was horrifying to listen to. Aileen clearly suffered terrible death.
Adlerstein recalls the medical examiner saying Eileen's injuries reminded him of those he had seen in motor vehicle crashes.
As a reporter, I try very hard to not be emotional. I distinctly remember fighting back tears.
Araujo claims she eventually put herself between Abel and Aileen, and the attack finally stopped. Aileen was badly beaten, but still alive, she says, and the exhausted trio just fell asleep.
I didn't think she was going to die from it.
Araujo claims it wasn't until she woke up the next morning that she realized Aileen was dead. She says she only participated in the cover-up out of fear of what Abel might do to her.
She seemed to me genuinely remorseful. Others had different opinions.
Who is Christina Araujo in your book?
Manipulative, cunning, chameleon. I think that there's evil in her.
Alex Morris is Zach Abel's attorney. He says Christina Araujo acted alone.
I believe that she is the murderer.
Let's talk about her story.
Morris says it was Christina Araujo who beat Aileen, and that photo taken by Mike Picavet at his home after the murder shows she had injuries to her hands and feet.
Which tells you Christina must have been the attacker.
That's right.
Christina Araujo was the one with homicidal intent, says Morris, triggered when Abel and Aileen took off with her in the rearview mirror. And he says those threatening texts that she sent to Abel's phone before joining them on the road trip read like a confession.
There are threats of bodily harm to both Aileen and Zach in the messages.
You come near me, Ho, I will kill you.
I think it speaks for itself, and that's exactly what happened.
After Eileen's murder, Morris says Araujo wiped down the motel room using the vinegar that Ronnie Jones would later smell. He says Abel's palm prints on the curtain rod got there when he moved it during the cleanup.
He was instructed to pick the curtain rod up over there and put it over there.
By
Christina.
This toll booth surveillance photo from after the murder shows that Christina Araujo, and not Zach Abel, was the one driving the car. And therefore, Morris says, she was the one in control.
The evidence indicates Christina to be the one giving the directions and had everything to be able to manipulate the situation.
Manipulating Zach Abel, says Morris, because of those threats she had been making for years about her father's influence in solving her problems.
Bottom line is Zach was fearful of Christina's father.
Abel chose not to testify. When Morris made his final arguments to the jury, he concluded the evidence showed there was only one person who wanted Aileen Seiden dead.
They haven't proven any motive as to why Mr. Abel would be interested in murdering Miss Seiden. But I'll tell you where motive lies, and it's clear as day, and that's with Miss Araujo.
The motive being, I want rid of the person who's taken my man.
So jealousy.
Yes.
In his closing, Patterson said Christina Araujo already accepted her role in this crime. He asked the jury to hold Zach Abel accountable for his part by finding him guilty of murder.
They lived together, they worked together, they own a business together. They went to the Sportsman's Lodge together. They emptied out the room together. They ran away together. They got arrested together. The only thing they didn't do together was kill Aileen Seiden? No way.
But who would the jury believe?
What do you make of Christina Araujo's testimony? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
She wasn't born here, and she didn't live here, but she was left here, and she'll always be remembered by Franklin County.
Residents of Florida's Forgotten Coast will now long remember Aileen Seiden, says Ronnie Jones. Almost 6 years after her death, the community waited for justice for the stranger they now had come to embrace as one of their own.
What was going through your mind as the jury begins its deliberation?
Make it quick.
I was told by the jury foreman that when they first went in, there was 10 in favor of first-degree premeditated murder, with 2 holdouts.
All right, everyone, please be seated.
After about 5 hours of deliberations, the jury reached a consensus.
In the case of the state of Florida versus Zachary Ray Abel, the defendant is guilty of the lesser included offense of second-degree murder.
Second-degree murder, just like Christina Araujo. Adlerstein says the jury foreman told him they just couldn't decide if Zach Abel had actually intended to kill Aileen.
They knew that Christina had pled guilty to second, and I think they eventually said, we're going to give him the same.
It doesn't tell me that they're equally responsible.
Mike Pickavet says even with the verdict, he is convinced his friend played no part in Aileen's death.
To me, there's an innocent man sitting in jail.
I think they're both just as guilty as the other.
Now retired from law enforcement, Ronnie Jones spends his days tending his bar in Apalachicola. He says he's still left wondering what really happened inside room 15.
Is this case a mystery to you?
It's not a mystery on exactly what happened, but exactly why it happened. That is what still bothers me to this day. Why?
Like what Aileen might have been about to say that sparked the attack.
It was my understanding in the rumors that she was fixing to disclose the fact that she was pregnant.
Pregnant? And was she pregnant? Did you learn that at autopsy?
I was at the autopsy and she was not pregnant. I don't know if she thought she was or not.
All right. When it was time for sentencing, Zach Abel finally spoke and told the courtroom another twist in this tortured story.
I had stopped and I grabbed a ring pop and I proposed to her with a ring pop and asked her to marry me. And she said yes. And me and Aileen were gonna go our way and leave Christina out of it.
Zach spoke at his sentencing and said that he'd actually proposed to Aileen during this trip.
I think that is just BS. It's a great story, but no.
I have been in the justice system in one form or another for 40 years. Rarely have I seen the sort of injuries that I saw on Aileen Seiden.
The judge told Abel he wished he could impose a harsher punishment before sentencing him to the maximum, life in prison.
In the state of Florida, life means life. We don't have parole.
At her sentencing, Christina Araujo's father, Colonel Tony Araujo, set the record straight. He said he never used his influence to benefit his daughter, and he recalled the conversation he had with her after the murder.
You will own up to the truth. You will accept responsibility. You will be the voice of the victim, and you will testify under oath in a court of law. And then whatever is sentenced to you, that's fine.
There was no agreement with her as to the length of sentence. She gave her statement with the knowledge that she could still receive life in prison.
I think about that day every day of my life. The details haunt me, and the memories keep me up.
The judge acknowledged her cooperation and sentenced Christina Araujo to 25 years.
Justice has been served. They won't beat up any more females, neither will she.
I think that every woman kind of thinks, I would leave if I was in that situation. I would just get up and leave. I would never tolerate that.
Eileen's best friend, Allie, hopes there will be more compassion for those trapped in abusive relationships.
It's always the, I'm sorry, it's never going to happen again. And you believe it because you're in love and things are good 95% of the time, but the 5% that are bad are so bad.
With your sister gone, how do you want her to be remembered?
I want her to be remembered as a sweet, loving human being who unfortunately had lost her parents at such a young age, but she was still so sweet. Like, she was such a sweetheart. Her soul was so kind.
CBS next Saturday. A young woman found dead. But are the clues adding up?
The piece of the bathroom door lock under Alex's head
meant the door was forced open before she was shot. It just didn't look right.
A new 48 Hours next Saturday at 10/9 Central on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
Welcome back to Post-mortem. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Green, and this week we are discussing the case of Aileen Seiden, who was brutally murdered at a motel while on a road trip with her 2 romantic partners. So what really happened in room 15? Well, let us talk to people who actually visited the room to report on this case. Joining me today are 48 Hours correspondent Peter Van Sant and producers Lauren White and Richie Fetzer. Thank you so much. It's great to sit down with you guys again.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Hi, Anne-Marie. Thank you for having us.
Hey, great to be back, Anne-Marie.
And remember, if you haven't listened to the 48 Hours episode yet, you can find the full audio just below this episode in your podcast feed. So go take a listen and then come on back here for our conversation. In April of 2018, Aileen Seiden was passing through the small town of Apalachicola with her partners, Abell and Christina Araujo, when they decided to make a pit stop at the Sportsman's Lodge Motel, but Aileen would never make it back home. You visited room 15 where Aileen was killed. What was it like to be there?
I've been in a lot of crime scenes, right? And inside that room, it took me back, when I was a kid and watched Psycho for the first time at the Bates Motel. It's disturbing because there ends up being kind of an energy in these rooms where a battle has taken place, blood has been shed, and a life has been lost. It's just not like walking into a typical room. It's also it's a very solemn place to go into knowing all of that has happened, and a very sad place, and you feel that vibe.
Yes, and especially it's strange in contrast to the beauty of the property. You've got these peacock roaming around. We're right next to the water. It's really just a lovely, lovely place. But that room definitely, you went in knowing it was going to be a somber experience, and it was.
Yeah, I always feel going to places, it's always great for us as reporters to actually be where things happened, but especially when it's a crime scene, or we also went to where Eileen's body was found, it always feels like hallowed ground. You're there to do a job, but it's also, eerie, but also solemn because, remind you of why we're doing it.
I was surprised that they actually let you into the room because, it's a business and sometimes people don't like that association. They want people to forget that anything bad ever happened there.
Anne-Marie, I was shocked. We always want to go to the crime scene. A lot of times it's, a house or maybe a public area out in the open. This was an operational motel room. We thought the chances of actually getting into the room were going to be slim to none. I called the motel owner, Miss Etta, but you can't say, oh, is room 15 available? Because then she'll know
Right.
what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So I said, my favorite number is 14, and I would love, how about room 15 as well? And 14 really is my favorite number, so I didn't lie. And I said, are those rooms available? She said, well, 14's available, but 15 isn't. I said, oh, well, 15 actually I really need. I work for 48 hours. And she said, oh, why do you want to do a story on this? It's such a sad case. I said, it is a truly sad case. But, we have found that in the work that we do, going to the crime scenes really helps the audience understand the case better. And we would be there for a large part of it with the lead detective, Ronnie Jones. And to my amazement, she said, okay, I'm going to move some things around. And she made that room available to us. I tried to book it as an actual room. She wouldn't let me. I tried to give her a location fee. She wouldn't let me. So she gave us that room for 2 whole days for free.
But that room actually is being booked.
It's booked. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow. So this area of Florida's Gulf Coast, it's referred to as the Forgotten Coast. But what we learned in this hour is this community has not forgotten Aileen at all. They didn't know her in life, but they've really worked hard to preserve her memory in death. In your experience, just how unusual is this?
It's very unusual. Generally, when outsiders come into a community and bring some sense of ruin and shame and shock, locals want to forget those people as quick as possible. But the folks out there on the Forgotten Coast are gentle souls. They live in this part of Florida that is so underdeveloped. It's like what Florida must have been like 100 years ago, where you have much more of the tropical feel to it. And instead of shunning her, they embraced her as one of their own, and it was really special. And you guys felt the same way, didn't you?
Oh, definitely. And they put up a memorial to Aileen near where her body was found. And what struck me is it's not like metal or stone or something that would be permanent. It's basically a poster. And
of Aileen's face.
Yeah, exactly.
It says Franklin County will never forget Aileen. And you had artificial flowers, but sunflowers, which were Aileen's favorite flower. And her sister Francesca actually put me in touch with the person who started the memorial, a woman named Debbie Jordan. She said that when she heard the case, she was just so moved by what happened to Aileen that she felt compelled to do something. So in addition to making this really beautiful memorial, she also got about a dozen cards and went around the whole county and had everyone sign the cards, and she sent them to Francesca and to Aileen's friends.
And the thing I think of is this is 6 years later. This crime happened in 2018, and here's this poster that someone is actually going back and maintaining and making sure it's still there because it was there when we filmed.
Yep. It really is a testament to this area because in addition to this memorial near where Aileen was found, Miss Etta from the motel also made a little memorial for Aileen where every night they put up a light. They shine a light in honor of Aileen.
Oh, that is so
They've been doing that
sweet.
every night, for the past 6 years.
It's like she developed this sort of whole family that she really didn't have in life. It was her and her sister basically against it all,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So speaking of kind of creating your own family, this is perhaps one of the more interesting components of this hour, right? Aileen was in a throuple relationship with Zach, Abell, and Christina Araujo. I've had to delete my search history, thanks to you, Peter, on my work computer, because, I had to do some research. And so, of course, this all means that they were all three in a romantic relationship. It's a type of polyamorous relationship, which has gained some popularity over the last few decades. But I think a lot of people can look at this situation and make an assumption about the relationship, that Abell was individually dating both Aileen and Araujo.
By all accounts, from the friends that we spoke to, Christina and Aileen were in a romantic relationship themselves. Like really, truly, these three people were dating each other. And I think something that was interesting that David Adlerstein, the reporter we spoke to, talked about was that when this crime first happened, people in the community automatically assumed, without hearing anything else, oh, Christina must be the killer.
Right.
And then once we've dove into the story a little bit more and you're learning more about the evidence pointing towards Zach as an active participant in Aileen's death, there's DNA evidence, his palm prints were on one of the murder weapons. So people's expectations don't always match the reality of what happened.
Mm-hmm. I know Araujo is basically saying this beating was started, she participated later on.
Right.
But she wasn't sort of the primary person. She didn't start this thing. But I wondered about the forensic evidence. Did it back up her story that she participated minimally in the beating of Aileen?
It did. And I think that's part of what the prosecutor said to us when he interviewed is that she's testifying and she's telling a story, but a lot of what she was saying lined up with the forensic evidence they found later. So they had this curtain rod that had Aileen's blood on it, and it had Zach Abel's palm prints on it. Didn't have Christina Araujo's. Then there's this walking stick that Christina testified was used in the crime. It's broken into multiple pieces. It has Aileen's DNA on it, and it has Zach Abel's DNA on it. Didn't have Christina Araujo's on it. The defense attorney would argue she had bruises on her hands and feet. So that, to him, he made the argument meant that she participated, and to her own story, she participated, so it would back that up. But
in other words, she was punching and kicking.
Right.
And the defense also say that the reason why Zach's palm print is on the bloody shower curtain is because Christina said, pick that up. And that, of course, his DNA would be on the walking stick. It was his walking stick. Now, it's a shame that this is our representation of throuples, because most throuples, I'm sure, don't end this way,
right?
And, or have such toxic elements. Seems like there was no transparency, no communication, no real consideration of each other,
right?
And so it was really kind of doomed from the start, in many ways.
Look, human nature has to play a role in this. 3 people together, sexually, socially. There's bound to be some envy, some jealousy, and it seemed to explode in that room.
And, throuple aside, this is a classic, domestic violence case. This is a case where, in many ways, she was isolated because she worked with them, because she lived with them. She was financially dependent on them, on making this work. So she had a lot riding on this.
What kind of struck me with this one specifically is we do domestic violence cases all the time. So we've seen this story a lot of times before. And what struck us from the beginning was Aileen was really facing it with 2 perpetrators. She had 2 romantic partners, and therefore she really had 2 abusers that she was trying to navigate and deal with, which must have been overwhelming.
Exactly.
Welcome back. You have a very powerful interview with Aileen's sister, Francesca, who even 6 years later seemed very emotional, very raw. What was it like to speak to her?
Francesca was so good to agree to talk to us about something as deeply personal and painful as this. She's heartbroken. And so I approach this, obviously, with as much sympathy as possible and respect for her. I thanked her many times for participating in this. Think of what she's gone through, along with what Aileen went through. Lost their mother, lost their father. Then she ends up losing her sister. And she carries a sense of guilt, and we all try to assure her she's not responsible for what happened to her sister. But she has dealt with so much, but she maintains her dignity, and we were just blessed to have her in this story.
Why did she want to participate in this?
She really wanted to be a voice for Aileen and represent not only Aileen, but represent their parents as well. And we all told her she represented her whole family beautifully. She showed a lot of strength, but this was very difficult for her to not only speak about the brutality of what happened to Aileen, but to speak on camera.
And we learned during the course of the interview, too, because some of the questions I had that I was asking gently involved details of what had happened to her sister. She didn't want to hear any of it. And she still doesn't want to know these details. No. It's just too painful for her. But I felt like we got her trust, and she opened up to give us details that are fascinating.
On our end, it was really watching also Peter's humanity and how to deal with someone that's experienced trauma and was very clearly visibly upset. And I think as you're going through an interview and we're kind of checking off questions, I think we all kind of experienced, and we're really watching Peter firsthand make a decision of like, we got enough.
Right. Peter was able to tell what her boundaries were, and we weren't pushing that.
Yeah. Exactly.
No one's trying to do more damage here. You
exactly.
know?
It was masterful to watch because it was, it's emotions as opposed to thinking.
Well, I mean, one thing that everyone at 48 Hours does to a very, very high level, but I know that Peter's always cognizant of, is delivering these stories with compassion, understanding that these are human beings who are willing to relive some of the worst things in their lives in the hopes of improving someone else's life.
Right. Right. Exactly. And that's what she wanted to do. And, these interviews are important that you're listening to them and reacting to them is far more important than the initial question. And I think it was almost like a therapy session, as we talk. You don't have these conversations with family members, When I lost my mother and I'm with my sisters, I didn't interview them, right? We don't have those kind of conversations. So it becomes a bit cathartic for them as well to finally talk about things that they've always wanted to talk to someone about but have not.
Sometimes it's easier to talk to strangers. I think we've all been in situations like that. You also interviewed Aileen's best friend. She did not want her real name used, right? So she's referred to as Allie in the show. Given her privacy concerns, was it difficult to convince her to go in front of the camera?
Right. First of all, she has a very unique name, and she was also concerned about her family. She didn't want her family to be kind of tied to this. And when I first spoke with her, she said, I do not want to be on camera. I don't want to be involved. I will give you information on background. I thought, oh, okay, that's great. Let's do that. And then as I kept talking to other people who knew Aileen, I realized that they didn't know the story. They didn't know this case. They didn't know what Aileen was going through in the same way that Allie did. And, we've all kind of experienced that the people who want to speak don't necessarily have the things that you need. And so, I went back to Allie and I asked her again, and she said, I'm not really interested. And then shockingly, she called me the Sunday before we left for Apalachicola. And she said, Lauren, how are you? And I said, I'm great. I'm actually heading to Florida. We need a voice for Aileen. No one knows the story the way that you do. And she said, okay, I'll do it. And I was shocked, but I was so excited because I knew that it would really help the story and that she would provide Aileen's perspective in a way that no one else could have.
I think it was an example of Lauren's soft persistence with someone that we're trying to interview, because it was an ongoing back and forth. And I mean, to Lauren's point, she knew everything, and she was really central to trying to help Aileen in her moment of need.
Yeah.
So it's like that whole part of that story, and even giving Aileen the grace that she was trying to get out of this situation, Allie was the voice to tell that story.
Yeah, I can't imagine what the hour would be like without her.
Right.
Because she really gave some insight into how Aileen wound up there and why it would be so challenging for her to pull herself out of
Correct.
it. Zach Abell did not take the stand at trial, but someone very close to him was actually supposed to testify on his behalf. His own mother, Kimberly Clark. But that never happened. So to explain why, I want to play parts of your interview with defense attorney Alex Morris that actually did not make it into the hour.
So what happened? Why didn't she testify?
In 25, coming on 26 years, I've never experienced this. She was here in Apalachicola prepared to testify under subpoena in a motel room. I'd been here for 4 days. She's going to testify the next day. The woman who came up with her, I get a phone call from her. It's frantic. Says, Alex, you need to come to the motel. Why? Kim's dead. I said, you got to be kidding me. So my first thought was, don't call me. We need to call 911. But I went to the motel, and oh my gosh. I mean, she's deceased. Of course, my brain's...
Wait a minute. Did she have a heart attack? She didn't take her own life.
No. So we know now, natural causes, the medical examiner's report, heart problems and things of that nature.
If Zach's mother had lived and testified, might there have been a different outcome?
Yes.
Really? Well, I mean, what was she going to say that made the defense attorney so confident?
Abell had to be humanized, and his mother was the person who was going to be able to do that. I lived in England for a while where the accused very often testify. In America, it's just the opposite. They rarely do. He chose not to take the stand. And so when you do that, you're defined by your enemies unless you have someone like your mom who will take the stand and humanize this guy. Alex Morris said it hurt the case because they lost that element.
Alex had mentioned to us, too, that Kimberly Clark was potentially going to kind of back up the story of Christina as being more of an aggressor in this relationship and really paint that picture a little bit clearer.
And she wasn't just, Zach's mom. She was also their roommate. She lived with the throuple around the time. I know. She lived with the throuple around the time of April 2018, right before this road trip. And she was there for that big fight that kind of started the road trip. So she could have really given some
an insider view.
Mm-hmm.
And, we wrestled with including this detail in the hour, but
ultimately, why didn't that detail make it in? Just time, or?
It's time. We have an hour to tell a story.
And, to Zach Abel's credit, Alex Morris offered him the opportunity, should we see about delaying or maybe seeking a mistrial because of this? This was a big, character witness for us. And Zach said, no, let's keep going.
Alex brought up to us that might be a reason that he could appeal. Because a judge might look at that and say, well, he made that decision, but he wasn't in the right headspace. Exactly. He was grieving his mother in that moment. So
that's fascinating. As we mentioned, Abel didn't testify at trial, but he did make a statement during his sentencing more than 2 months later. 48 Hours was there that day. What was the reaction in the courtroom like to hearing Abel speak?
We were very excited to hear what he was going to say. And his statement was that he loved Aileen and that actually this road trip was kind of a little bit of a love trip for him and Aileen. And he claimed he proposed to her on the trip with a ring pop. And, it's the specificity of it. It wasn't just I proposed with a ring pop. But we were kind of very shocked by that because by the prosecution standpoint, you killed her maybe a week or two after that. But he said that they loved each other. They were going to start a family together and they were going to get away from Christina. That was his whole thing. Their whole plan was to get away from Christina.
Yeah. And we're hearing this. I mean, we're processing this. And then the judge is also hearing the statement and then sentences Abel and gives him the maximum and actually says that he wishes, I'm paraphrasing, but effectively he was saying that he wished he could give him a harsher sentence. And he'd sentence him to life.
Right.
So what does that mean? I mean, I don't know that I've heard a judge personally express anything like that before.
Right.
Because remember, the details were explained in court with photographs and everything else of her body.
Yes.
What was done to that woman is as shocking a killing as I've ever seen on any 48 Hours, and I've been doing this for a couple of decades. It was a shocking killing, and that was the undercurrent for all of this, so that as the judge is listening to him express regret, he has the memory of those photographs.
Right.
He knows what was done.
So then what about Christina Araujo's sentencing? Because, I mean, between the two of them, she made out much, much better.
Christina Araujo, in the end, her judge, it was a different judge than Abel's judge, sentenced her to 25 years. So she could have gotten life in prison like him, but she got a lesser sentence of 25 years, and he acknowledged her cooperation with testifying for the prosecution.
A lot of Aileen's friends and loved ones were really nervous that because of the connections that Christina had bragged about for all of these years, according to them, that she might just get a slap on the wrist. But clearly she did not. I mean,
it's not life.
It's not life, but it's not a walk.
Absolutely. So Araujo always bragging about her dad.
Right.
And I thought to myself, why does she keep saying this? Like, was she a problem child before? Had her dad helped her out before? But now we've, elevated to a level where you're like, sorry, kid, I can't help you. I mean, did we find out any sort of more background on her?
I mean, there's a lot of rumors.
Right.
There's a lot of things that friends and other people have speculated. As far as evidence, I mean, we haven't seen any.
Right.
And he spoke at her sentencing and was pretty clear that he had never used his influence to help her. And, I mean, I think was pretty eloquent in saying that.
Oh, for sure.
I think she just tried to use it to intimidate. It was a power play. I've got this dad who can make things happen and will protect me, nothing more than that. He turns out to be, based on all of our reporting, a very straight arrow guy. And he told his daughter, you're going to admit what you've done and you're going to pay the price for what you've done. So just the opposite. He did his job as a lawman. and he was, in a way, kind of a hero in this case.
Yeah, for all of her bragging and all of the alleged threats she made to Aileen about her father, about her powerful connections, when push came to shove, he turned her in. The father turned her in.
And to his story, was influential in her pleading guilty.
Wow. Well, I'm sure absolutely devastating when you dedicate your life to law and order to have a child that you then have to turn in. So at the end of the episode, Eileen's best friend, Allie, expressed her hope for more compassion towards those trapped in abusive relationships. And I think that you're helping to fulfill her hope for sure by sharing Eileen's story. This is a great hour, and I hope that ultimately people also learn from this hour. Peter, Lauren, Richie, I want to thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
If you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline. That number is 1-800-799-7233. If you like this series, Post-Mortem, please rate and review 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts and follow 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also listen ad-free on Amazon Music, Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, or with a 48 Hours Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening.